Hi everyone, my name is Arthur. Welcome to our channel. Today we'll be discussing the poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. So first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about the author, then we're going to move on to reading the poem together, then the summary, then discussing a little bit about the themes and main symbols in the poem, besides the figurative language as well. All right? So come with me. Let's go. So first of all, Percy Shelley, he was born on August 4th of 1792 in Warham in the UK. He married Mary Shelley, the writer of Frankenstein, and she had four children with him, which three of them died at birth. The only one that lived was named Percy Florence Shelley. He studied at Oxford University. He was part of the Romanticism movement, right, that conveys emotions, natural world, mystery, supernatural, melancholy, and these themes are very much present in his poems. All right, so that's enough about him. Let's go and read the poem together. Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculpture well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." By the way, this poem had a brief apparition in the movie Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the one that was just now released in 2025. So it's nice for you to see this correlation between Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, and the director very intelligently used some lines of the poem in the movie. So go watch it and you will see what I'm talking about. All right, so a little summary of what I've just read. The speaker of the poem, he basically meets a traveler who comes from an ancient land. The traveler describes two large stone legs of a statue which lack a torso to connect them. And they stand upright in the desert. Near the legs, half buried in the sand, is the broken face of the statue. The expression of this face shows that the sculpture understood the emotions of the person that the statue is based on. And now those emotions live on, carved forever on inanimate stone. Surrounding the remains of the large statue is a never-ending and barren desert, with empty and flat sands stretching into the distance. One of the themes of the poem is the power of art. Art is expressed in this poem in the form of the sculpture of Ramses II, who is also called Ozymandias. The sculpture conveyed in this poem shows that how the pharaoh is, the personality of that pharaoh. For example, and a wrinkled lip, sneer of cold command. So through the sculpture, the viewer, the reader actually, is able to interpret that most likely the pharaoh was a very tall man, authoritarian, powerful. And the perspective changes when it's realized that the statue is broken and decaying. But still, the truth of art remains. Not even time can ruin it. So we're still able to see the personality of that pharaoh at that time. Even many years have passed by. So the power of art is very strong. So art is also depicted by the poem itself, since literature is art. And we can only perceive this through the aforementioned poem, which is also art, like we talked about. Another strong theme is the transience of power. all power was lost, vanished away. The sculpture is now broken, it's old, it's showing the power loss, connecting to the idea that nothing besides remains, if there is nothing left in terms of power. From one of the most powerful pharaohs to just an angry face sculpture laying in the sand. The fact, something also interesting about the form of the poem over here that we can connect to this theme is the iambic pentameter used in the poem. It starts very strong and then it becomes looser. And we can connect this perhaps to the transience of power. This idea of decaying the power as the iambic pentameter also decays. Another theme, which is, I would say, the main conflict as well in the poem, is man versus nature, which is displayed throughout the entire poem. Ozymandias loses his power through nature. Nothing is stronger than nature. His power was consumed by sand, showing that no matter how powerful you are, time will pass, and you too will be consumed. You will fade away, and so will your power. The idea of time is also present in the sand, since the statue was consumed by it. And we can even associate the sand with an hourglass, enhancing this idea of passage of time. Let's talk about some symbols. So the statue of Ozymandias has a few different symbolic meanings. First, the physical representation of the power of human political institutions, right, such as Ozymandias' empire. And this is the symbolic purpose for which Ozymandias himself had the statue built. The statue also symbolizes, like we already talked about, the power of art. Through the sculpture's skill, the statue captures and preserves the passions, right, of its subject by stamping them on this lifeless rock. While Ozymandias saw the statue as a way to forever capture his power and his magnificence, the poem hints that the statue reveals Ozymandias' cruelty, which is also served to mock him, right? His great works have been destroyed and disappeared by nature and time, and art in the form of the statue endures, keeping Ozymandias' memory alive. Another strong symbol is sand. In the poem, sand is a symbol of nature's power and also of time itself, like we have already discussed. The sand, remember that the sand has eroded and buried the statue and all of Ozymandias' works, right? So all of his empire is nothing but sand, it's just desert. So the sand has erased all of that, destroyed all of that, all of his human achievements, no matter how substantial they once were. So because it destroyed the statue over time, and because of this idea of the sand as an hourglass, like we talked about, the sand also represents time itself, which similarly worn down and eventually buried Ozymandias' empire. Now let's focus a little bit on the literary devices. One that is very strong is enjambment. So the poem goes from one verse to the other, and Shelley uses enjambment and this continuation of a sentence without a pause between the end of a line. First of all, I would like to focus, if we take a look at the poem, in line 2, when he's describing the statue's legs. So he goes, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. So you already go to verse 3, for example, right? Also an example is on line 6, when he goes, the sculpture, well, those passions red which yet survive. So again, stretching. So when he talks about the passions being preserved. Once again, it supports this idea of passage of time, this idea of vastness, of something that is, it doesn't stop, right? Time doesn't stop. You cannot contain, you cannot stop time. So that's why, like, you go from one line to the other as time goes. There is no way of stopping the passage of time. You do also have caesura, and there are these moments of unexpected silence, and there are these break lines that he is able to break some of the lines into smaller pieces. For example, in verse 3, stand in the desert, ellipsis, near them on the sand. So this caesura over here, this punctuation marks and breaks and introduces the first time exactly over there the statue fragments. So the broken lines, they are similar to the fragments of the statue itself. So it makes sense that he's introducing precisely this part. The alliteration, especially, I would like to highlight the sibilants, right? The repetition of these fricative sounds, especially the S sound: stone, sand, stand, sunk, sneer, sculpture, survive, stamped. There are other parts of the alliteration. I just would like to highlight this, because much of this alliteration is hushed. And I would say, I don't know about you, this is quite personal, but for me, the sibilance creates an effect of the sound of sand dropping on top of sand, of time slipping away, reinforcing this idea of the hourglass and of the passage of time, and which I find it very, very beautiful. Then we go to this part in which we kind of have what it says on the pedestal, which we kind of have what Ozymandias would say, right? My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. And this is ironic, right? This irony after reading the inscription of the statue, the viewers will now look at the king himself and everything that he has done and still feel his power. However, nothing beside remains. So readers don't fear him. They may fear, on the other hand, nature and time, which destroyed Ozymandias himself and whatever it was that he had built. So it's ironic because look at my works and despair. What works? They have been destroyed. So this is ironic. The form, the meter, and the rhyme scheme. Let's talk a little bit about that. So the poem is a sonnet, right? It's not a traditional English sonnet, since the iambic pentameter is played with, throughout the poem. It's not strong like we have already discussed in the video. And it declines as the poem progresses. Probably, like I said, to indicate that the power of Ozymandias or Ramses II was precisely declining. But the poem is also divided in one octave, focusing on the statue, and then a sestet that focuses on the pedestal and the surroundings. This division is very typical of the Petrarchan sonnet rather than a Shakespearean sonnet. And the rhyming scheme would be A, B, A, B, A, C, D, C, E, D, E, F, E, F. All these changes to the traditional rhyme scheme, the structure, and the meter of the English sonnet heighten similarities between poem and statue. Both are works of art, like we have already discussed, and they're broken, and there are missing pieces. But you can still see their origin, the tradition that they once had, right? Despite the passing of time. Now let's move on and discuss the speakers of the poem. Yes, speakers, plural. There are 3 speakers in this poem. So the first one, the primary speaker, is anonymous and genderless, and all that Shelley tells us about them is that they met a traveler from an antique land. This is how the poem starts, right? I met a traveler from an antique land. And then he proceeds to talk about what this traveler told them. So the poem does not include details about who this speaker is or what does he think about the traveler, or about the destruction of Ozymandias. In fact, he just distances the reader from what is actually being told. So he's just relating a story told to him by the traveler. Told to him or her, right? By the traveler. So we move on to the traveler, which is the poem's second speaker. And he is likewise anonymous and genderless. Some people speculate that the traveler is actually the ancient Greek writer Diodorus Siculus. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing, but that's how I think it's pronounced. Whose description of a statue of Ozymandias inspired Shelley to write his poem. So maybe this is a traveler. In this interpretation, the meeting of the speaker and the traveler occurs through the act of the speaker reading Siculus' words. Anyways, and then we move on to the third speaker, which could be Ozymandias himself through his words on the pedestal. Right? So all of three speakers, the poem provides the most details about Ozymandias. He announces himself as a king whose concerns focus on his own greatness, on his own power, and on his own legacy. Now let's talk about the setting of the poem. The first is an unspecified time and place. Most likely it's in the early 19th century England when the poem was written, where the speaker and the traveler met. The second setting is the recent past in Egypt, where the traveler sees a ruined statue of Ozymandias in the desert. So we have these two settings over there. The poem only spends a line and a half on the first setting. So this is any location in which the speaker can meet Siculus, right? This ancient Greek writer that we talked about, whose description of an actual destroyed statue inspired Shelley's to write the poem. While the rest of the poem, the second setting that we talked about, concentrates on how nature can destroy everything human made, from political systems to statues, and yet how art, even when broken, can provide artistic immortality. Context. Ozymandias displays many of Shelley's concerns, both in terms of its depiction of man versus nature and the apparent politics. Shelley and his friend and fellow writer Horace Smith challenged each other to write about Ozymandias and his destroyed statue after reading about the statue in a description written by the ancient Greek writer Diodorus Siculus. Interesting fact is that Shelley may have been inspired to write this poem by newspaper reports that the British Museum had acquired the large head of an Egyptian statue, a statue that later turned out to be of Ramses II, also known by his Greek name, Ozymandias. So a little bit of historical context. A fragment of the sculpture of Ozymandias produced not despair at the futility of human achievements, but rather excitement, enthusiasm, and ultimately the preservation in a museum where the artifact would be protected from the elements and, as much as possible, protected from time itself. In this reading, the poem serves as a warning to those who seek political and military power that they will fall and they will eventually be forgotten, just as Ozymandias was. So this reflects a lot about Shelley's concerns and his political concerns, to be more precise. So this was my analysis of Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. I hope you've enjoyed. So just to wrap up, I would like to ask you a question, just maybe to spark a conversation, or perhaps it could be a question for a possible essay that you would like to write. So the question goes like this: how does Shelley powerfully convey to you thoughts about the passage of time in Ozymandias? Food for thought. Well, thank you very much. My name is Arthur. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and that's it. Stay tuned for more videos like this. Bye.